Good morning. It's good to be here again with you on this Memorial Day weekend. And it looks like it's going to be another beautiful, beautiful day here. And hopefully where you are, it is just as beautiful and wonderful. As we remember those who gave their life for our freedom this weekend, that's always held a close place in my heart. I had a number of brothers serve in the military and friends that they lost and stuff. So it means a great deal to me on Memorial Day. So anyway, today, as you are coming on, please pop into the chat box and say good morning. Good morning, Bonnie. Good to always see you there. Kyla, good morning. I have received some notices and mentions from some of you, and you continue to send your questions and your quilts to me and blocks and things, and I love it. It's good to see the interaction, because that's part of the way that we can interact with one another here. Good morning, Mary, Wyndon, and Judy. Oh, good morning, all of you. All right, today we finish up with our improv quilt. It's always bittersweet a little bit. It's been fun to create and find, blocks and things to do with them through the past month or so that we've been working on it. But now it's coming to an end, and we're getting ready to start a new project. So my mind is still here because it's not quite done, and I'll show you where I've been thinking in terms of borders and stuff today. And we're going to also sew and match up sashings. Someone requested that, and so I want to be sure to honor that this morning. And then we've got a new project coming, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. But first, this holiday weekend, the Quilt Show store is having a huge sale. All of their books and notions, I am going to just pop in here and just make sure that I get it. All of their fabrics, their kits, their patterns, their books, everything in the quilting basics category is on sale for 24% off. And if you use the code SUMMER24, that's how you're going to get that 24% off. And I looked through all the sale items and stuff before I came on. There's some great things. And if you're looking for a project that's coming up for you, or you need some of those basic things, or a new book, and I just noticed that Kristen put up a link to the store, and so please pop in and check it out. There's several things that I think that I may end up getting, because I've got some things on the works. If you could see around me, besides what you see on the screen, I've got a pile there, I've got a pile over there, and I've got a pile there of things that I'm working on. So I need a few things. If you can believe this, well, I know you can, because we're quilters, and this is what happens. I've got these projects going, but there's one fabric that just doesn't, I need it, and I can't find it in my own stash, or I want something different than what I have, so I need to go and find it. And I think the Quilt Show store is where I'm going to do that today. And then, so next week, I also want to tell you about that. We're going to do some indigo painting on fabric, and I'm excited for this. I've done some indigo dyeing. It's been a long time, but I've done it, not totally successfully. There was a little bit of a learning curve to that with indigo dye, but it's fun. And now they have a kit that's out that is fabric painting, so we can be a little bit more creative and do some more things with that. And I'd like to share that with you. The store after the sale on Monday, so the kits for this indigo dye paint is going to be in the store after Monday, so keep your eyes open and watch for it. The kits, I don't have my stuff in here because I've been playing. This is what the bag is going to look like. You're going to get the indigo dye. You'll get a binder and a blender thing that will help it to be permanent on your fabric, and a couple other things in the kit, and obviously with instructions. But we'll do that next week. I'm looking forward to sharing that with you and finding some fun things that we can do that. Karen, glad you made it to the live. That's awesome. So the first thing that we want to do here is I want to get into the quilt that we've done. I have all of the rows there, but I didn't sew the last row on. And after I do that, then we're going to talk about what I've been thinking as far as borders go. Because as you know, I'm planning this right along with you, and I kind of played and worked with some things. So let me grab the quilt itself. All right, let me drop the camera. All right, here I have, the first 3 rows done. I know that the space is small and you can't necessarily see it, but I need to put the bottom row on the quilt and match up, here along these. And how do we get this needs another little bit of a pressing. I've pressed it earlier on in the week, but it needs a good pressing now as I'm getting ready to put that on. And so now I need to put this bottom row on, and the question was, how do you match these up? It may seem like a simple thought or a simple thing to do, but I want to share that with you anyway. And so the first thing that I do is I find my 1/4 inch seams, and hopefully you can see that okay. So I want to line those up there, and then I come down here and I'm going to put this back. And as you can see, and if I press correctly, I don't know that you can see that real well on the screen. For some reason, it seems very dark today. And so I've got both of those lined up, and I'm going to push my finger into that 1/4 inch seam and make sure that it stays put as I line this up here. And I'm going to peek at it one more time because I had to move it. And then I pin on both sides. This is an awkward pinning. And I'm going to feel there and just double check and make sure that I have that on that side. And I continue to do that all the way down. So again, I need to move that over and fit that in there. I'm going to check it here, and once I move it up here, this usually comes out to be pretty much right on the seam line, and I'm going to continue to pin that. And I pushed that a little bit, so I need to readjust. I don't know if this is the most accurate way to do it. It's just the way I do it. And but at least it gives you a somewhat of a game plan to. And the other thing that I want to say at this point is, remember to push your pin straight down and then move it so that it stays in place. And I can double check across that, and then I'm going to simply sew that up. And again, I would highly recommend that right before you do that sewing, like right here, that you have pressed, your rows and your top together really well. I did do that earlier in the week, but I didn't do it this morning. Because that certainly is going to help with your accuracy. And I will leave my pins in until my needle is right there so that it doesn't move. And I've actually taken a stitch into my 1/4 inch seam because I certainly don't want to get movement as my machine is pushing along. And generally speaking, I will put my pins in at an angle from the top right to the bottom left across the seam so that I can actually sew one stitch into the seam. But with this one, I wanted it straight because I was trying to match up those rows. And I have discovered that that doesn't always help. And as I'm sewing and the seams are going, in the same direction as my machine, instead of getting that pulled curve or, the seam going back this way or messing it up, I use my stiletto to help keep that from happening. And so I'm going, right up to, and it's actually one stitch into the seam, so that seam is not going to go anywhere. And hopefully, when this comes out, I will have matched those seams correctly all the way down, and so far so good. And so that's how I do it. I don't know if that's the best way and the way the professionals will tell you to do it, but it's the way I seem to get a good and now I'm putting it back on the wall, and let me change the camera for you so you can see it. And let's talk about the borders. First, I want to share with you what I did to play. I did two different things. I thought I was going to go into a different direction and, put a row around with, all my little extra scraps and things that I had. But as I got to doing that, I wasn't so sure I liked it as well. And so I started, I made about 4 or 5 copies of, this from the picture that Kristen sent me of the pattern. And, that I shared it with you on a couple of the shows and stuff, but it's just a mock-up of the pattern, and just took it off the screen. I just dropped it into my photos and did that. And so I started playing with a lot of different things. I liked the wide border, but it was too much and it kind of overwhelmed the center. So something has to happen in here. And my thought at first was using up my scraps and generally going around the outside, and I'll show you that on the quilt itself in just a minute. But that wasn't doing it for me, so I played with some other pictures and stuff, and this is the one I think I finally came up with that I like. I think it adds something to the quilt, but it doesn't take away from the center of that, at least not for me. And so let me take you to the quilt behind me, and I want to make sure that I'm off the screen here. So I have my center, and I tried to make sure that I kept my colors throughout. I stood back from it and put my blocks in so that there was no color that overwhelmed any other one or stood out, and my eye kept moving around the quilt. We talked a little bit about that. So here was my first game plan. I kept about, this is I think 3-inch cut, so it would be a 2.5 when it was done. And then I just took a bunch of scraps and kept sewing them on, the gray onto the end, and cut it so that it would look like it was part of the outside of that quilt. And that right now is 2.5, so that would add, it would be about a 4 to 5 inch border that would be on the side of the quilt. And I thought that could be really good. I was okay with that. It wasn't happening for me. So that's when I started drawing. This is not sewed on. I simply decided that for continuity, and so that it wasn't cluttered and the eye didn't go crazy, I would keep that sliver at about somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch wide. And so I laid it up there all the way around. I cut this gray piece at 1.5 inches. Sewed the, I think you can see it here at the bottom, and I sewed a 1-inch piece there, and then I'm gonna cut that, as I showed you how to make slivers, down so that I'll either get 1/8 of an inch or a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch, maybe about 3 inches to 3/8 to 1/4, something like that, in there. Sew it on so I have that strip. So I started to play, and I just took strips of this, and these are just folded strips that I had from something else. So for example, this, I just fold it in half and put it up there. So these aren't necessarily the size they'll be, but I didn't want them too wide, because the wider they became when I was playing with them, the less I liked it. So I've put, I just pinned these on here, and I'm going to be sewing gray strips to the bottom, and so this one is these will be sewn on first, and then I'm just going to start slicing like we did before when we did slivers in the quilt, and putting them across in whichever way I like the way they look. I will put in some wide ones from time to time, and so this will go this way, and I'm going to bring the other corner up here. If I did all the corners, because I played with them, it became too much. So this is what I believe that I'm going to do for the outside of my quilt. It echoes some of the things that went on and happened within the quilt, and I liked that, felt good about that. What I want you to do with your quilt is to go back and possibly either draw this out, or if you can drop it into your photos like I did from one of the previous classes that I had, and I put this up on the screen. If that's possible, go for it and put it out and play with it and see what you would like to have done with that. But this is pretty much where I felt that I could do that. If this, let me bring this over. I folded this. If you like this idea for the side, I think 4 might have been too many for that. But what I was doing here was simply taking my strips, and I would, just sewing these together. And I think I'll just do that real quick so that you can get an idea of where I was coming from. And So I just kind of kept doing that along. And then once I had that accomplished, I pulled them apart, and then I tried to keep the top of these together. These are pretty close in size, so I might just flip that up a little bit and cut it off, so they aren't side by side. So this is definitely improv. And then I would sew along the side, and once I had that sewed along the side like that, I measured in, my let me move that up. So I just put these side by side like that, so they were, uneven and whatever, but so once they were, I would measure from here, and here was 2.5, so I would cut that off, and then I just kept adding that to my strip. And that is one option. It's not a bad option. There's nothing wrong with that. One, you could have this as as much space between it as you wanted to, or I felt that was a little bit too much, so that's why I bent it over when I pinned it on the wall. But however you want to go around. Or if you go back to, something different, or completely leave your 1-inch sashing all the way around and put a solid border on. It's really what looks best to you with your quilt. And this may be more work than you want to do. Let me go and see if there's any questions. And Bonnie has given a suggestion there too, as we're sewing the strips together with the sashing, and she says sometimes I make cornerstones out of the sashing fabric to help up, do the rows, and that does work great. It just adds another element to it so that they do line up easier and fit nicely in there. On this particular one, I did not want cornerstones. So the sashes, Sonia, I cut them at 1.5 so they would finish at 1 inch. I felt that looked the best as I played with it in terms of the sashing. Any bigger, and I lost a little bit of the blocks, and any smaller, it for me it just looked a little bit strange. All right. Okay, I think that's all the questions that I see. If you have more, you know that you can always check in with me on that. And how wide is the border? For my border here, it is, I cut this at 3 inches to start with, or 3.5, so it would finish at 3. This one, but I added this 1.25 inches, so I cut this top part 1.5 inches, and I'm going to, if you want to do something on this, I felt that I needed to go all the way around with that extra inch out there. So the border actually mine actually ends up being the same as my blocks. Without being sewn in, they're 4.5. Finished, they're 4 inches. So that's, I cut 3.5. I added that extra inch on it. So yeah, Kyla, that's perfect. That is what I was hoping for in this, that you don't necessarily need to do all the projects that we show on the show. Do the ones that strike you, that are fun and interesting. but to give you an idea of all the different possibilities that you might do if in the future you want to do an improv quilt, you might, I kind of got addicted to the slivers. So my next improv quilt that I might do would be something with doing that type of block and repeating it over and over again to give some continuity to the quilt. And I think the border and the sashing for me here is doing that for this quilt that was meant to teach technique. And how would I bind the quilt? That's a good question. I thought about doing it in black. I've only got one block that has any black in it. I'm going to have to really look at that. I might go ahead and continue with the gray. But I think I want something to close it. Make it some more of that deep purple, that teal color that's right here. And put that on the end. I may still go back to black and do that. I think I need to get the border completed, the top done, and then again look at it and see what happens. The other thing that I've got leftover fabric, so it could end up being, you know, a strips of all the different fabrics and make it you know, a combination of all of them as the border, and it would be a very colorful, bright, happy border to finish it. I don't know how that would really look with the border that I've chosen to go with, but we'll see. So gray, black, multicolored, whatever. And maybe a deep red. That's not a bad choice either, Kyla. I kind of like that idea as well. So it's going to be a matter of playing with it, looking at it, putting something up there, and just living with it for a day or two. I find that when I put something up that I think that I like, I leave it. I'll come back. I don't look at it. I'll come back the next day or whatever, and either I still love it or I'm going, I got to try something else, and I will. And oftentimes I'll try 2 or 3 things and put it on opposite sides of a quilt or on the top and see what happens. So I'm really excited that this is done, and I'm excited to see your guys' finished products and see what you come up with. And then next week we'll be here with Indigo fabric painting. Don't forget to go into the quilt show and look at the sale items. They've got a lot of great things and a lot of very useful items on there that I use all the time. And I will see you next week, and I think it's going to be June, if you can believe that. So, and Kristen has put up links to rewatch and to go to the forum for your questions. If you have trouble with the forum or whatever, it repeats on YouTube under D. Christopher Quilting or the Quilt Show, and then also on the screen is my email address where you can send pictures and things so that I can put it up for the next week. Have a great one. Bless